So how long have we been talking about doing this podcast?
This has been talked about forever.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I think that we recognized is when it comes to a parts department, the dealership model's changing, and I think that manufacturers are probably going to start to go away from the model where it's a new car sales receivership place, but parts isn't going anywhere.
Absolutely not.
Right? And I think that really when you think about it, the parts department might be the most stable part of the business.
For sure. Like the whole saying where they say parts is parts. They say that for a reason, right?
I think so. I don't even know what it means, but I like it. Also, was going to ask you a question too. How much did the parts manager sell his dead batteries for?
How much did the parts manager sell his dead batteries for?
Yes.
I don't know.
Nothing. They were free of charge. So just in case anyone was wondering, there's so many bad jokes to come with this podcast, but I also want to take a second and introduce my partner in crime, who I would say is one of the foremost experts in parts in the industry, in the automotive industry. I'm going to kind of let him talk a little bit about his journey, but one of my favorite things about him is that he's found a lot of different ways to make a parts department successful, ran one of the most successful, biggest, most profitable wholesale departments in the southeastern United States at one of the stores that he worked at, and really it's kind of been your life as far as that goes,
yeah,
right?
So starting up, growing into the business, starting out as a young man in the industry, fresh out of high school, walked into a parts department not knowing what to do with life and found my way into parts and ended up being a parts manager at a really young age. And so that kind of set the stage for everything. So I had to figure out a way to become me and grow it into my own business. So wholesale was an avenue that we chose and a path that we went on. And we did become a very successful wholesaler in the region that we were in. Continued on that journey and just kind of moved on from there. So yeah, I've got tons of experience, many, many years inside of a dealership parts department.
So this is half a joke and half serious, but what was your training like when you became a parts manager?
So the training for a parts manager is simply the same as it always been. Here's your pen, here's your paper, make me proud. Right. And by the way, don't mess up the inventory too much.
Yeah, and the really crazy thing about a parts manager is, like, if they have a question, who do they ask in the dealership?
So think about this. Is there any other place in the dealership specifically that no one's watching what's purchased? All parts managers purchase their own thing. The dealer's not coming back there and limiting the stock order. None of that's taking place. They just have freedom.
Yeah, it's so crazy to me. And really thinking about, the parts department in general, like, it's kind of this mystical place because, we joke a lot of times on SDR about the fact that, maybe 1 in 100 general managers was a service manager.
Okay.
But like literally, I don't know if there ever has been a situation where someone was a parts manager and they became a general manager.
I
right?
don't know that I can think of one. Absolutely not.
Yeah, and I've never seen a general manager walk back to a parts department and be comfortable.
That's fair.
So one of the things that we're going to do with this podcast is we're going to give our parts managers a resource. Okay, so that's what I want everyone to know is that there's a lot of topics, there's a lot of ways to run a parts department really effectively, but no one's talking about them. There's no platform for us to get together. So we're building a community of parts managers, and they're going to become assassins. They're going to run better inventories. They're going to be more profitable. They're going to be more customer-centric. And we also want to get to a point where other people in the store can go back to the parts department and feel comfortable understanding the business model.
And have a conversation. Most people aren't having the conversation because they just don't understand it and they push it aside and they would rather keep it back there. And it's just part of the business, but they're not having the conversation about it, right?
Yeah. So Cliff, in your experience, what have you seen as the interaction between departments in general from the parts department? How do they view service? How do they view sales?
So from the parts department's point of view?
Yeah.
So most of the time the parts feel that they're a silo unto themselves. They're an island by themselves. They're stuck over in the corner. They want to be left alone, that they're just there. So they view themselves as their own entity within the dealership.
Yeah, so definitely, I mean, silo to an extreme. Like if every other department's a silo, the parts department's way over here.
Yes.
Right? So they're really out of it. And then as you've kind of gotten through, what did you start to recognize about the other departments in relation to in relation to that department?
So what I found was that I was reliant on the other departments, because very rarely does somebody come in and buy one get one free starter. So I was relying on other people selling the parts for me. Something happening, a car has to break down, a car has to be sold, something has to take place before a part can be sold.
Right. So it's rare that parts department's running everything through the front counter.
Correct.
Right. We don't have enough people walking in asking for parts to keep that business healthy.
That's right. Something typically has to break before someone purchases it, or they're trying to personalize their vehicle.
Yeah, and this season we're going to talk about different opportunities for parts departments and ways to increase sales. We've got a lot of great topics coming up this season, but what would you say is the one opportunity that almost every parts department's missing?
The customer service aspect.
Okay, so unpack that for me a little bit, because I would say that, my experience with going into parts departments is that they don't see themselves as a customer service vehicle.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. They don't see themselves controlling CSI. They don't see them controlling the experience for their customer. And the customer could be a technician, the customer can be a salesperson, the customer can be a retail person. It doesn't matter, but they're not focused on the customer experience. It's just give them a part, get them away, and get to the next one.
Yeah, it's very systematic. It's very much task oriented.
It's very transactional.
Transactional is a great word for it.
A transaction, it doesn't become personal.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think that parts managers are going to respond to this?
Parts managers are looking for an opportunity, and as you stated earlier, you said it was a platform. They're looking for a connection. They're looking for a community. They're looking for someone who understands them, because, again, as we said a minute ago, the silo, they're out here by themselves. They want someone to connect to. They're looking for a tribe, so to speak.
Yeah, that's great. I love that idea, and I think that the main thing that I see with parts managers, and I've met so many of them just from going into dealerships, is I've always done that where I'll meet a parts manager, they'll kind of explain their system, what they do, how they run their business, and I always leave that conversation saying, man, they've got so much more to offer, but nobody listens to them, right? So I think that that's the thing for us, is that we need to give parts managers a voice. And I think that, if we have to pick 2 or 3 things that we're going to accomplish, is that one is we have to eliminate the silo thing. And I think that is far and away, one is parts departments, like, I think that there's some tribal knowledge to that. And I think they get comfortable being in their own silo.
Sure.
And a parts manager, honestly, I always liken them to accountants, right? So accountants are kind of there to count beans, and they want the exact amount of beans in the right spot at the right time.
Okay.
Well, parts managers are kind of like that too. They want their report to hit, showing their inventory levels are exactly what they are. They want clean inventory. They don't want to have obsolescence. They don't want to have waste when it comes to the way that the parts are on the shelves. We're going to get into organization and all that stuff this season too, which I think is a phenomenal discussion on exactly how you should organize your parts department, when most of the time that's a tribal knowledge thing, right? So the parts manager just basically doesn't change anything, because they're like, well, I'm coming into this situation and it just works. And another thing that's really interesting about this too is that there's really little turnover with parts managers.
For sure. In most dealerships, you'll find that the longevity of the employee is that tenure in the parts department is the longest. Like 30, 40 years. There's guys that have been in the business really, really long time, and they're stuck away in parts.
That's right, and they're not hopping from store to store. They're staying in the thing, and that's a good and bad thing, because for 30 and 40 years, no one's really ever expected a lot out of them. They just want them. I always think about it like this. Like a general manager and the relationship to the parts manager is like, whatever it is, just don't bother me with it. Like if I don't hear anything bad about parts, that's a good thing. but they're not looking at it as a profit center or an opportunity. Like really, you could think about it. You can affect retention with a really good parts department. You can affect sales of vehicles with a really good parts department. It is literally a free advertising when you start to talk about all the opportunity with accessories and personalization and everything like that. Thinking about that when you go onto a service drive, you look at every car that comes in. How many of them are bone stock?
I would say, we're doing percentage here?
Sure, it's a completely educated guess.
Yeah.
But if it's not exact, I won't throw you out of this
I would say 42.5% of the vehicles are bone stock.
Okay, so 42.5%. Just in case you're scoring at home, that means 57.5% of all cars coming into every service department all across the country have accessories or are not stock. So now here's the scary part about that is when it comes to that personalization and those accessories, how many of those are dealer born?
Oh, are we going off percentage again here?
No, because I feel like you just made up the 42.5% thing. So
that's a super educated guess.
Yeah.
I'm going to go 50%.
Yeah, so at the most, I think.
And that's going to be based on manufacturer too.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that other manufacturers embrace the accessories, but I can't tell you how many times when I was selling vehicles, and it never even occurred to me. Like I would sell a vehicle, and then the customer during the delivery is like, oh, I'm taking it here to do this, and I'm taking it here to do this. And like it never occurred to me that we could do that too. And I think that's probably the same through most parts and sales departments.
So I would even add another layer to that and say, how many vehicles do you think, or how many new cars are sold that the customer takes somewhere else to get tinted?
Tons. Just window tint in itself.
Just window tint alone.
Yeah.
And I think that's an avenue that we could run through parts, generate revenue that we just don't think about because the imagination isn't there.
Yeah, or we see it as an extra work. But really, when it comes to tint, like the way that some of the machines work and everything like that, it's really easy to inventory. It's really easy to use it and actually have minimal waste and everything like that. So it is a heavy profit center for a parts department.
For sure.
If you're not involved in that, and if you're just outsourcing tint, you should really research it and consider what can that do for a parts department and just the sales and service departments at the same time.
Yeah.
So step one is I think that we're going to get our parts departments more effective at the integrating with the other departments and them really starting to see them as a solution, not just a necessary evil.
I'd almost like to see them bring out their personalities a little bit more.
Yeah, they're in there. Like honestly, the fun thing is that like if you had to pick like a manager in a dealership that you most like to go have a beer with, like your parts manager is pretty cool.
Parts manager's that guy, for
sure. So I think that is, hands down, they don't have as much voice in the dealership because we've stifled them, not because they don't have a voice.
I feel like in a lot of cases, though, a parts manager, so you said a minute ago that the GM doesn't want to go back there. He just wants to go and do his thing. There's no communication line, right?
Right.
So I would like to see the communication line open up to where the parts manager wants the GM to come back and talk to him about what's going on in the parts department, what's going on with the manufacturer, what's new in the world. Most of the time, a parts manager just wants to sit back there, be left alone. If the GM doesn't come back, that's kind of a good thing in their mind because he's not coming back saying something's wrong.
Yeah, but they're definitely not collaborating.
No, for sure they're not doing that.
It is definitely adversarial, and it's like us against them, and then like, I just want to keep you out of my world.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely another thing that we have to work towards. And I think that the next thing really is understanding that a parts department is a huge part of customer service.
Without question. I think it's one of the most vital roles of customer service.
Yeah,
and them understanding their role in that aspect, I think is one of the most important. I'm super excited when we actually break that down and what that looks like. But that's a vital area that I think that we miss out in the parts department, but it's super important.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because we'll go into stores and if they've got customer satisfaction or CSI issues, the service department, the sales department, they point at parts, and then what does parts do? They point the finger right back at the other departments. Like, so really it's this hot potato that nobody's catching. And I think really at the end of the day, as the dealership model changes and we shift, let's say over the next 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, the parts department and integration are going to become vital to the success of stores. I think if you don't have a healthy parts department, you will not have a healthy store overall.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
So what else, if you're kind of thinking about those couple of things that you want to have a service manager or parts manager come out of that, and it's funny I said service manager because I was thinking the same thing about like there's got to be an integration in terms of like when you look at a service manager and a parts manager, like they have to become one in a lot of cases. But what are a couple of other things that you want to teach a parts manager that they just are missing right now?
I think it boils down to communication, because when you talk about them coming one, like think of a marriage, and most marriages struggle with the communication when they're failing. Communication, it can always go back to communication. So I think for a parts manager to understand that effective communication with the other departments and the other employees of the store is vital to their success.
Right. I think that's really good. Yeah, it's funny you were talking about your wife. So we're in like pre-production here, talking, having a conversation. And Cliff, I'm gonna let him tell this story because I think it's great. But he looks over, he's like, Christian, you know what I really don't like about my wife? And I'm like, well, Cliff, if you want to talk about this on the podcast, that's fine. I'm sorry that your marriage probably won't continue on much past it, but let's give it a shot. But Cliff, please tell me what it is that you don't like about your wife.
Well, sweetheart, I would like to make a clarification on that statement. I said, do you know what drives me crazy about my wife? Not that I don't like you. I love you. Now, back to what I did.
You think that's going to work?
Probably not, but it was a good setup, right?
It was effort at least,
right? Absolutely. So what I said that drives me crazy is the trash in the door panels. Like, I get it, we travel a lot. I get it, we're in the car a lot. I get it that it's a protein bar wrapper. I get it that it's a cheese stick wrapper. I get those things.
Do you have a favorite cheese stick?
Wait a minute now. It's not my wrapper.
Well, like, are there cheese stick wrappers that bother you more than others, depending on the brand? Because some cheese sticks, they peel really nicely, and then it makes a nice one-piece thing in there. But there's cheese sticks out there where you pull it all the way apart. Now you've got two pieces of wrapper. Do you know?
Yeah, I don't think that that's a matter to me. I think it's, more importantly, I think it's the protein bar, because you got the chocolate on the wrapper and...
Oh, yeah, don't forget the granola stuff that gets on the ground.
So that being in the door panel drives me crazy. So now their goal for when I get home is, do you know what their goal is for when I get home?
I would hope that it's that there's no wrappers.
That's right. They clean out the door panels.
Okay. So that, when you told me that story, I was like, that's a parts manager. Because I think that really when you're running a parts department, there's no room for wrappers.
Oh.
It was one of those things that like hit me like a ton of bricks, and I was like, oh, that's the mentality of a really good parts manager. Because another thing that happens too is that Cliff and I will go into stores, and literally you can tell how healthy a dealership is based on the condition of the parts department.
Without question.
It is.
I think the cleanliness of it is key. Like the setup of it, just the way it looks, the overall layout, you can generally tell the experience that the customer is going to get based on what that looks like.
Yeah, and the profitability of the department.
Oh,
like
hand in hand.
The wrappers, if you will. So like the empty boxes, like that. There's a part here, but the warranty box is over here. The way that like like your little nuts and bolts are organized, everything like that. That all plays a part, 100%. And it's like Chris says this thing all the time. He says, "How we do anything is how we do everything." And I think about that with parts departments all the time. And really, so as you guys are getting in and really looking at your parts department business, how you do anything is how you do everything. So I think that that's a key, is to recognize it might seem like a little thing. It might seem like we're doing a poor job of inventorying wheel weights, for instance. But really, if we're doing a bad job at that, we're probably doing a bad job at inventorying brake pads, right? And then you've got the situation where you end up, and I don't know, it just drives me nuts, but where you end up with one rotor on the shelf. Where are we going with that? Nowhere. So we're not having healthy inventory levels, and we're not stocking cleanly. But I do think that keeping things clean is so vital to a healthy parts department.
So think about it in this manner. If I just randomly put a part on the floor in the parts department, like if that's my bin location is just a floor and it's just sitting there, if I can't find that part, then I might as well take that money and go throw it in the dumpster, because it's no different. If I can't find it when I go to sell it, it's no different than me taking whatever the value is of that part and sticking that money in the dumpster.
That's right.
It's the same thing.
Literally lighting it on fire. So as we kind of wrap up here and just setting the stage for what's to come this season, just the three things. If you want to write these down, that's great. But just know that there's more content than this coming. But really, our goal is understanding that we want to eliminate those silos. We want to make parts departments think like they're customer service people, not like they're just there to receive and then give out. And then at the end of the day, like organization productivity equals more sales. So more sales equals more profit at the end of the day if we have a good pricing strategy, and really supporting the other departments within the store is what's going to make this this dealership run really well in 5, 10, 15 years. So with that, any funny jokes or anything like that?
I'm not going to try that.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a real creative person to tell a terrible joke. You know, I was trying to think of one, but yeah, nope, I don't think I have any more. But we look forward to seeing you guys in. Tune in for some awesome content coming up this season, and that'll do it for Parts Hold.